Hello, good morning, everyone. We're here and we are about to have a wonderful discussion. My name is Taj, of course, helping out with the amazing things that's happening here on Wolf Bitcoin. And today we have a very special guest. We have Susie Violet Ward, who is the CEO and co founder of Bitcoin Policy UK. So I'm really excited personally to just dive into these things and hear what's happening across the pond, if you will, because a lot of times we hear about what's happening in the US, North America, and it's just great to have someone that is in the trenches, if you will, on that side of the pond. So, welcome to the show. Really appreciate you being with us this morning. How are you doing?
Really well. Thank you so much for having me. It's actually 3 o'clock in the afternoon here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right. A 5 hour difference here. Yeah, it's just I'm still having my coffee, but really appreciate you coming in even better in the middle of the day, kind of breaking things up. But you guys are doing some amazing things over there. And I would just like to hear a little bit about you, what you're excited about. And of course, most of our audience is in the States, so not really familiar with what's happening there in the States. So I'd love to hear about that, your mission, and of course, what you guys are working on.
So our mission, we co-founded Bitcoin Policy UK because there was no Bitcoin specific policy group in the UK. They were all crypto. And unfortunately, a lot of these crypto organizations are funded by lobby groups that can effectively print their own token, which means that they are furthering a cause which I think needs to be distinct. So, as you and I know, Bitcoin has a 60% dominance. It's the main crypto asset. It's a decentralized protocol. It's not like crypto, which are VC companies. And so we needed to make that distinction clear because you can't regulate Bitcoin, or you shouldn't be regulating Bitcoin in the same way that you would regulate a meme coin or a stable coin or an altcoin. But at the moment, currently, our Financial Conduct Authority considers all of crypto to be under restricted mass market investments and same risk, same regulation, which means that they're putting it in the same risk bucket as a meme coin with Bitcoin, which is ridiculous. And so, unless you can advocate and educate policy makers and these regulators properly, it will just be left up to the crypto bros. So that's kind of why we exist.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions about Bitcoin by not just policymakers, but people in general, because the majority of conversations I have when people ask me, I'm just like, oh, how's the trading going? It's like, I'm not a trader. It's like, but so you're not into Bitcoin anymore? Like people just don't understand necessarily
Yeah.
what's going on here. But really excited to hear that, you guys are uh, boots on the ground, getting this thing going forward. But I'd love to know, like, what are the, I guess you'd say, sentiments of like general British perception of Bitcoin, the average person on the street. What are the thoughts about Bitcoin?
Okay, so I think the BBC and mainstream media have a lot to answer for here because most people just read an article that they read, in the BBC or the Guardian kind of a few years ago, 5, 10 years ago, and they think that it's a Ponzi scheme, it boils the oceans, and it's just used for criminals. So I mean, if your listeners know what Brandolini's law is, it's the asymmetry of bullshit. So it takes 10 times the magnitude of energy to refute the bullshit than create the bullshit in the first place. And I suppose that's kind of where we're at the moment because Bitcoin perception in the mainstream media for a long, long time was mostly negative. And that was actually analyzed across all of the different news outlets, the Times, the Guardian, um, the Daily Mail, Financial Times, all of those newspapers that most people trust, and it was largely negative. And I know as a Bitcoin journalist, I've written over 140 Bitcoin articles. There's a lot of good stuff to write about Bitcoin, and I found it really surprising that the mainstream media didn't really think that there was anything other than number go up. So, we're kind of undoing a lot of that damage because a lot of policymakers form their opinions from reading these newspapers. And so we need to first and foremost teach them the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. I mean, that really is difficult. A lot of people, even in these crypto organizations, don't fully understand the difference. And I've read some of their consultation papers, and a lot of the time, they'll talk about the environmental impacts of these cryptocurrencies when they don't even understand the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. So it's it's exceptionally difficult because you're not only dealing with policymakers that don't understand, you're also dealing with lobbyists that are just there to do a paid job. And one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin Policy UK is at our largest, we had a team of 14 volunteers, and every single person there was there because they cared about the mission, and they were volunteers and they weren't being paid. And it was every single person from every different educational status, from different political parties. We were all completely different, from school dropouts, me, right through to people that went to the best schools and universities in the country, from green voters to reform voters and everything in between. Like, we really were uh, completely diverse, but yet we agreed on this one thing, and we all came together because we believed in Bitcoin, what it can do for people, and the freedom aspect of it. And so that's something that we always had on these other organizations. Is for us, it was a shared mission, not just a job.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And I do love that when people find a cause, something that they can rally against or rally towards. And despite whatever quote unquote differences they may have, that they find the common ground and work towards the mission. And I think that's a beautiful thing personally. And, when a few things that you said is very interesting to me is because I have met so many people within this Bitcoin ecosystem, and they're from all over the world. And what it always comes down to is that the core problems that Bitcoin addresses, it's something that we can all identify with. And I think if people would look at the solution to our problems as opposed to all of the foolishness, that we would actually come to agreement. But like you said, the media and the way it's spun completely changes narratives and perceptions, because a lot of times here where I currently live in Jamaica, a lot of people think that Bitcoiners are anti-law and order, and they're somehow trying to bring down the system, right? Like, as far as like, they don't want to see things structured, they don't want to see, like, it's almost like anarchist like viewpoint of it. And it's like, no, we actually want like peace, we want people to get along, we don't want the whole world burning like a Mad Max scenario. It's so, but again, that perception of media and what I guess you would say people understand, there's a huge gap. So I'm really excited that people like you are on the ground, again, sharing this information. But as far as the big differences, I guess you would say, that you guys face over there, because yes, there is governments and laws everywhere, but something that's like really unique to the UK per se, because you guys have a strong monetary system. You have a lot of, I guess you would say, things that people would think of. That's what we're striving towards. So how is communicating that Bitcoin is solving problems that you might not see to the average British person? How does that work for you?
That is also another huge challenge, because a lot of countries that are facing instability, so you take countries like Lebanon or Zimbabwe or Argentina, or even large parts of Africa. So I went to the African Bitcoin conference towards the end of December, and it's so easy to explain the concept of Bitcoin because they've felt the pain and they see the problems. And so it's really not a leap to explain why Bitcoin is brilliant to people that have lived in, economically very tricky times. It's a lot harder to explain it to someone who's kind of gone through, decades of relative economic stability. And although they're feeling the pinch because inflation is quite high, it's not bad enough where, they've made that switch over to, oh, we need a new system. Like, because when you've got people in Argentina where they get paid, and then by the time they've even gone down to the shop, their money has lost its value, you very quickly got to find solutions, whether that be swapping it in stable coins or Bitcoin, or some kind of hard asset. People find resourceful solutions when they're in a situation where they have to. But if you're just suffering from kind of 3 to 10% inflation, depending on, well, one, if they're telling you the truth, and two, what's actually happening, you're just going to kind of accept it as, well, what are the alternatives? And so I think a lot of countries that have experienced an immense amount of pain are actually in a more fortunate situation, because the innovation that I see that's and the building that's happening in Africa, the solutions that they're trying to solve is mind blowing. And it's because there is a serious need for it. But it's like the boiling frog analogy, it's happening to us so slowly in the UK that people don't know that they're being boiled.
Yes, it's funny because I obviously those that are listening, I hear the accent and so forth. I've spent most of my life in New York, the heart of finance, and I am Jamaican, but I moved back to Jamaica, and it's really interesting because when I first came back, the exchange rate, for example, was 110. Now it's 160. So $1 is worth 160 Jamaican dollars. So the erosion of the currency is very obvious to everyone. The common person that's selling peanuts on the street understands that our currency is being devalued. So we don't even have to open up with an education on that. They all see it. The second thing is, like you said, inflation is quite a tricky thing, because even here in Jamaica, like the official number that comes out, I don't know how they're calculating it, but I was privileged enough to be the main family business that we were in was in food. And every truck, every invoice came in, we were adjusting because the prices, of course, the dollar being devalued, we're buying a lot of our supplies from the States, and then they're going up 10, 15, 20%. Then we'd see the report come out and it's like, oh, 4% inflation, 5%, 7%. It's like, what? Like everything on that last truck went up 25%. So, okay, whatever. Anywho, so as far as being able to explain that, I find it very interesting that you said the pain is a benefit. And in
Mm.
many times, unfortunately, I think that might be the case. So as far as the comforts and trying to explain that to people, how do we bridge that gap? Like in countries where things aren't necessarily terrible, but they're obviously not working.
So education is a huge part of it, but people have to have curiosity, and they do have to have felt some level of pain. I mean, if the system has worked for you, you're not going to be looking for an alternative system. So that cuts out a lot of people, because I think still there are people here that still believe in the system, and it's a lot of people don't even know they're in a system. I find that really terrifying as well, that they're not even really aware of what they're, the debt, the way that the system traps you. So when you really think about how the school system works, and then you go to university, a lot of people are told that that's the path that you have to take. I personally didn't, and I don't think it's right for everyone, but over 54% of the population in the UK go to university, which means that then it's the scarcity, isn't it? It devalues it. So they end up coming out of uni with kind of tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt. 21 start their life with a worthless degree, completely unable to get on the property ladder, trapped by the system. And they don't even realize there's an alternative, because that's what they've been told success looks like. And so the whole thing's one big con. And so unless you can see and identify the con, you're not going to realize the constraints that you're within, or the fact that there's a solution, or that you can change it.
Yeah, it definitely is, I guess you would say, very hard to see the label when you're in the jar. And
That's such a good
it's
analogy.
really
That's
it's really
perfect.
interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting because you just don't see the problem. Like other people can see it from the outside, but I think of often, we talk about the orange pilling of everything and the analogy of Matrix and everything. I know that's been overplayed so much, but
I
it
know,
is
but I love
so.
that film so much. In
Yeah.
fact, I'm gonna watch it again this week. I have to. I think I could watch that. In fact, I watched it the other day, and my kids came back and just went, "Mummy, you're always watching that film," and I'm like, "I love it."
Yeah, because it just it says so much in a way that like it's hard to articulate what's going on, But when you watch that movie, it's like it's great launching point too as well to just have the conversations. And that's one thing I do like with trying to bridge the gap, because I asked the question like, how do you bridge the gap? And I find that each individual it's different, and I find like media, whether it's a song, a book, something that they can personally relate to as the best gap. So I think a lot of the times we try to do like this mass onboarding, this mass orange pilling, and I think that's so difficult because each person has a different, I guess you would say, touch point. So I'd love to know, like, kind of going back to your origin, what was that touch point for you that made you see, boom, like get the lights open, if you will, to what's going on here with Bitcoin? And now, of course, you're so dedicated to it and you're spending so much time. But what
That's an
was that touch point
understatement.
for you?
Um, Lots of different ones, yeah. But I realized I didn't answer your question about how you bridge that gap, because I don't have an answer. Like I don't know. Like, I've spoken to so many different people, and I come up against a brick wall so often. Even if I do find what they're interested in, I find it very difficult for them to understand why. So I've kind of given up, and that's why I focus on the actual work that I do directly, because I just think there's no point in interacting with people if they don't have the curiosity to want to take it on. But I think I've always been a Bitcoiner, even before Bitcoin existed. I just have always had that ethos, that that decentralized, I don't fit in this system kind of feeling. And I think a lot of us would say that we kind of felt like Bitcoiners even before it existed. And there wasn't really one moment, it was lots of little moments. But first of all, I was at work in my kind of fiat mining job, because I used to be a systems accountant, and we had a team call, and one of my colleagues said that he'd bought some Bitcoin, and my boss laughed at him. I remember thinking, like, why is that funny? Like, what is it? And then I suddenly thought, Bitcoin, like, how do you buy that? Do you buy a whole one? Do you buy a fraction of one? Like, how does this work? And then all of a sudden I realized there was this whole new element of finance that I had no idea about. I didn't know how to buy it. I didn't know how to interact with it. And so I kind of just, I bought a tiny little bit, like £70 worth. But it's because I wanted to buy some Dogecoin and some Ripple. God, I'm so sorry. But the thing is it actually kind of started me on that journey. So I bought £70 of Bitcoin and then split it £35 between those two on an Exodus hot wallet. But that got me thinking about, the whole ecosystem, and went through a serious shitcoining phase. Like, I know some people don't go through that, but I think, it is a rite of passage. Almost got wrecked, learned a lot, and then started to really appreciate the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. And once I kind of went through all of those different processes, I just had lots of different penny drop moments where, like, I'd watch a video with Andreas Antonopoulos, Bitcoin and the Bubble Boy, I think it's called, and he talks about Bitcoin's anti-fragility. And then it's just like another, like, wow, like, I hadn't even considered the anti-fragile aspect of Bitcoin. And then you learn about the difficulty adjustment, and you're just like, this is beautiful. Like, this is absolutely incredible. And then every time you kind of learn about another little section, it's just like, this is so well thought through, so clever, so it's never been hacked. It's better to get on board and be a part of the system than it is to hack it. Like, it's all like Satoshi thought of everything, it feels like. And the proof of work aspect, when you get your head around that and you realize why proof of work's important, well, it just, every time you keep learning something, it just keeps blowing your mind. So not one moment, just lots of moments.
I personally connect to a lot of what you said because, so first of all, like the person that was really trying to get me into Bitcoin and everything before was constantly speaking about this new opportunity to get rich really quick. And that did not resonate with me whatsoever. And it probably set me back a couple of years. So I was like, yeah, I'm not really looking for a quote unquote get rich quick opportunity.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until, of course, I moved back to Jamaica, and you said you went through like a crazy exploring all sorts of coins season. What actually opened the gateway for me, because I had that conversation when I was living in New York, and it didn't click because it was presented as money and trying to get quick, get money fast. So when I moved to Jamaica, I was listening to a podcast, and that was during like the NFT craze, which is, a crazy time, just a wild time. And I connected with the technology side of it, and that's what made me understand how blockchains work, is the technology of it. So I came in actually as a tech nerd, then connected it to the finance, because I was always interested in finance. But the reason why Bitcoin became attractive to me is once I understood the technology. So that's not the route that most people will go to. You start talking about the tech, it just goes over their head and they glaze over. But for me, it was so, again, connecting this is very individual, how you're going to present this. And that's why I found that very interesting that you went through like those different connection points and then finally made your way there. But anyways, I relate to that personally because it's not really a conventional path. Like, I do these workshops and try to teach people about money and savings and what Bitcoin actually does and how it fixes the system. But I came in through a very different route. So being sensitive and knowing where a person is, I think, the hardest, but also most important thing to have that conversation. But really appreciate you sharing that and connecting that, also cross cultural. The issues that we have here in Jamaica, or when I'm speaking to Americans, is very different than the conversation that I'm having and hearing about with our friends across the pond. So going back to that whole conversation, with the global monetary system the way it is, of course, the pound and the British system is so strong and ingrained and respected just globally. So the strength of that now, how, I guess you would say, trying to connect those two things together, how does that affect the way in which it is presented in the UK? Because I know, like, we spoke about like the difficulties of it, but really trying to crack through all of that, because again, the strength in my mind globally, everyone thinks that the British are okay, just great. So again, trying to connect those two dots of trying to, get past it. I know that was a loaded question. I kind of went all over the
No,
place.
I'm trying to think of the best way to answer it. And you're right. We are the financial hub of the world almost, and we're also a leader in computer science. You'd think that we'd be all over this, but we don't seem to be. I mean, we're what, the seventh largest economy. We should be smashing it out the park. But unfortunately, 16,500 millionaires left the UK yesterday. Oh God, that would be a lot. In 2025, last year, because the environment here is tricky. We live in a nomad society now. You can almost work from anywhere. So if your country isn't serving you, you can move. It's as easy as it's the sovereign individual playing out essentially. So a combination of people leaving the country, and our regulators just not understanding, and as a result driving out businesses. So we've got businesses that are leaving the UK at an exponential rate. So where we were and where we're going are two completely different things. And the stats show that people are leaving in their droves, and they don't want to be here because it just doesn't serve them anymore. So you look at countries like even like America, where they've got a Bitcoin strategic reserve, they've got the Clarity Act that's coming out, they're starting to pave the way when it comes to crypto regulation. They're trying really hard. They're I mean, absolutely not perfect. I mean, Trump absolutely should not have started his own shitcoin. I do think there's a lot of self-interest that's going on, and I reckon he's probably making a hell of a lot of money. So I'm not saying that he's perfect by any means, but I'm just saying that the conversations they're having over there are completely different to ours, where our financial conduct authority don't understand the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, and our economic treasury to the secretary, when asked at the same time that Donald Trump was bringing in a Bitcoin strategic reserve, if the UK would follow, she just shrugged her shoulders and said, it's not for us, without any kind of like I think when we wrote to them afterwards, they cited volatility and all the usual crap that kind of comes with it, but their lack of understanding, and it goes back to reading these lazy articles that have been written in mainstream media. So the thing is my journey to Bitcoin had a 20 years in TradFi prior to that. So I started off as a secretary, which is very helpful with my journalism because I can type quite fast. And then I moved into accountancy, and then I became a systems accountant, and then I was a developer for a planning system called Cognos. So I've had all of these different jobs that has led me to Bitcoin. So when I write about Bitcoin, I feel like I have the financial and the IT backing essentially to understand it in more detail. A lot of these journalists, they go to journalism school, they come out with a journalism degree, and then what do they specialize in and what business experience have they had? So it's not really their fault. It's just that it takes a lot of learning. Like we say, don't we, in Bitcoin, that it takes at least 100 hours to get your head around it. So have these journalists put that work in? No, probably not. And if you've got that as the baseline for how people, even regulators, because there are people reading these articles too, are making their decisions, the whole thing is flipped on its head, and it just almost feels like the blind leading the blind.
Yeah, I don't think most people do understand it. And honestly, the longer I spend within Bitcoin circles and the more I go down the rabbit hole, it's truthfully, I realize how little I actually know. Because once I started hopping into mining spaces and hearing all of these discussions talking about possible nuclear, the challenges of solar, I was like, great, now I'm getting like a PhD in energy. It's like,
Yes, exactly.
it's really crazy. Once you go down this rabbit hole, it's like you can never get to a point where like you feel like you know everything because there's
No, it's a
always
pinprick.
it,
Everything. And that's what I think. When people call me an expert, I have to say, no, you cannot. Please, please don't use that word. I am so far from an expert. What I know about Bitcoin is a pinprick. Like it really is. And I feel exactly like the more I know, the less I feel I know. Does that make
exactly.
sense?
Yep, absolutely. Every time I
Okay.
take one of those surveys, like where are you on the Bitcoin spectrum? I always put I know about Bitcoin. I never put I know a lot about Bitcoin or I'm an expert about Bitcoin. I just put it's like in the middle. I know about Bitcoin because I just realized there's so much that I don't know. Like you know, again, I've sat and listened to miners speak about like the most nuanced part of mining, such as how to seek the most optimal energy price within the US or a jurisdiction. I'm like, wow, I can just listen. I have nothing to contribute here. I'm just going to soak up because I don't even know what that even means. And that's something that actually flows over. You said earlier with like journalists who go to journalism school and like they're only in that box, and no knock on them. But the same thing. What I realize is when people are Bitcoiners and they're exploring all these different things, it actually flows out to the real world because that same understanding of how energy works and sourcing energy then helps you to run your business, helps you to run your home and do all these
Yeah.
different things. So it's the exact opposite. It's like it spills out from Bitcoin to the real world and not necessarily where certain professions and what you're learning is ever going to impact the real world. So really
Yeah.
interesting on that note.
Well, even the concept of proof of work. So my son was saying about, some work, he hadn't done something, and I was just like, you reap what you sow. You put in the work, and I said it's proof of work, and I was like trying to explain this concept. But even things like that, like looking into it, like all the effort that you put in, all that energy, and then you start thinking of things in terms of energy and preserving energy, and how you want to preserve that energy, and like that whole mindset changes. So even when I now the work that I do, I feel so lucky that it's almost been preserved. So I think about my fiat job and everything that I did. No one remembers the late nights where I was trying to consolidate and do intercompany reconciliations for a consolidation in New York for these 10 different intercompany accounts. Like, no one cares. No one cares. And no one will ever care. Like, no one cares about the late nights that I put in when I was trying to get our systems off the ground. When we were building new systems, those systems will come, they'll go, they'll die, and that work will die, and then like in a few years time, no one remembers your name or the work that you've done. It's just kind of gone, and it's part of the system. But when you're in Bitcoin, it's like your podcasts, that is going to be there forever. Like someone could find it and get some value from that at some point in the future. That energy feels like it's going to be preserved. Very much the same with it comes to my writing. Like a lot of what I write are like timestamps for things that I'm thinking. So I had a column in City AM, which was a London newspaper, and I could write opinion pieces on how broken the system was and how Bitcoin could fix it. And so I would write about all sorts of things. This was back in 2023. I'd write about how BRICS currencies were forming and how they'd have to be backed by Bitcoin. And I would see where I thought the wind was blowing, and then I would write articles almost as a timestamp to say, like, this is what I was thinking at the time based on what I could see. And now I can go back and reference them kind of 2 years and say, I was saying this 2 years ago. And it's not like a I told you so, but it's more of a kind of like, we can see which way the wind is blowing. We can see what's happening. Like, I can prove that this is predictable, everything that is going on here. And so a lot of the work that I do now, I've especially with the work with Bitcoin Policy UK as well, with the consultations and everything that we're doing there, that energy is going to be preserved. That work is not going to be lost, and someone in the future will find value in it.
100%. I still watch some old talks that Hal Finney was giving, because it's like it is as relevant today as it was when he was giving those on. It was those overhead, those transparent slides that you put on the thing and it
Oh
projects
yeah.
up to the wall. I was like, oh man, like this is a throwback right here, but it was still relevant. But I find that really interesting too, because the work that you are doing is very, very important. So as far as if I was someone, whether an individual or a company or whoever it is in the UK, and I'm trying to really get a grasp of this, and which point do you guys actually come in and try to, or what area of, I guess you'd say, the education and awareness is your most common touch point with the public, or is it majority of it on the politician policy side, or do you interact with businesses and so forth?
The majority of our interactions are with policymakers. The public that we interact with are mostly Bitcoiners because they're interested in what we're doing and what we're lobbying for. And normal people don't tend to reach out to us for information. When we did have three main pillars. We had our policy pillar, our mining pillar, which when I co-founded Bitcoin Policy, I headed up. So I do actually know kind of more than most on mining. Um, and demand response and flexible load, which is why I really loved that you used that as an example. And then an education pillar. So we do have lots of different functions, or we did. We've now had to go, unfortunately, into a consolidation mode where we will still consult with the public, and if we need to, policymakers, etc. With our consultations, we'll put things on the website, but we will not be able to do the kind of sprinkles that we wanted to do. Like, we wanted to become a research think tank, and we wanted to have a tax group and things like that. We just don't have the funding or the resources for, because like I said at the beginning, a lot of the money flows into crypto. And so a lot of these crypto lobby groups are really, really, really well funded. And we do unfortunately live in a pay to play system. But I don't think we live in a democracy. We live in a system where if you've got money, you can lobby. And so we know that Bitcoin has no CEO. And because a lot of people in the UK don't really understand why Bitcoin's important, we were completely unable to get funding after kind of 3 years of hard slog. I mean, I went on a roadshow for like a year, went and contacted companies, reached out, pitched decks, meetings, and the answers always seem to come back. They'd go with someone like Crypto UK, Stand with Crypto, some blockchain bullshit, something or other, like, so they never came to us because we were Bitcoin only. And it was just a very, very tricky thing because nobody really understood that, crypto is largely harmful. Bitcoin has a 60% market cap, and most of the cryptos out there, although they are VC projects, most of them won't make it. And just seems like a load of nonsense. Yeah, that seems to be where the money's flowing. So yeah, it's sad. It's really tricky, but we are still early, and what we're going to end up doing is preserving our work, making sure we can still write and submit consultations, but all the sprinkles are going to have to go until we get funding, which is a real shame because that's where a lot of our educational efforts were when it came to. So, for example, with our education pillar, we had a teacher that used to actually do after school clubs and teach kids about money. and
Oh,
things
wow.
like that. And heat little projects where they'd heat classrooms with S9 miners or take them apart, put them together, lots of little Bitcoin projects. But you can only do things like that if you've got time and resources and money. And if you've got none of those things, then you have to make sure that you conserve your resources and your time, and that you do what is the most important part. So we're still going to function, we're still going to keep going, we're still going to interact, the name is still there, we will still speak to policymakers, we will still go and represent BP UK. But unfortunately, a lot of the outreach and the educational and the extra lovely bits, they're all going to have to disappear.
I know earlier when we were speaking about, certain countries and places where it's really rough. That's the other benefit that, even here in Jamaica that we do have. We can have an event, we can spin it up for, I guess, if I convert it over into pounds, since you are in the UK, it'd probably be like less than 200 pounds. We can have an event and fill out the place. And that's a benefit that we do have. But being in the UK, of course, the cost of living, the cost of everything is a lot higher. So yes, unfortunately, we do understand and know that it does take money to keep these efforts going forward. So hopefully, as more Bitcoiners come online, they're going to not only stand with you and join in the efforts in spreading education, donating their time and efforts, but also that they'll contribute to it because, like you said, it does take a lot. And when you're going against like these VCs and everything, it's very hard to get a clear message through. But
Yeah.
one thing that I do find very interesting is when I was trying to research, for example, the stance of the prime minister on Bitcoin. Like, I couldn't find anything on that, so I don't know if that's something that's like publicly known on your side. But when I was trying to figure out like what is the prime minister's stance on Bitcoin, it's like it seemed like a black hole. There was like no information.
Yeah, so our previous prime minister, I can tell you that Rishi Sunak, who was a few prime ministers ago, we've had quite a few recently, it almost became a bit of a joke. He was very pro crypto. Um, Possibly didn't understand the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, but he did actually say he wanted the UK to be a crypto hub at the beginning of 2024, which was interesting because then they brought in lots of regulation that made it much harder for exchanges to operate here and for people to buy Bitcoin. So that seemed not really to fall in line with his vision of it being a crypto hub. He literally they made it harder for people in the UK the same week that the US approved a Bitcoin spot ETF. So while the US are moving forwards, we're just going backwards essentially. We had Liz Truss, who was a prime minister for 44 days. Um, she's now doing the rounds on the Bitcoin kind of network in the UK, being pro Bitcoin, but she's no longer prime minister. But they were all conservative ones, and I actually interviewed Kwasi Kwarteng, who was our chancellor the other day. He was chancellor of the Exchequer. He is starting his own Bitcoin treasury company, so he kind of, I want to say, gets it. I don't want to be too unkind because the thing is I don't really like the term Bitcoin Treasury Company. I think it's really bullshit, and I think people don't really understand the difference between the different kind of treasury options, and it's just a term that's been invented, possibly by David Bailey to I don't know, to just kind of create the next experimental grift of this cycle, which is kind of what it feels like because there are three different types, just for your audience. If anyone's confused about what a treasury company is, you'd be forgiven. Nobody really knows. But basically, it's any company that puts Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which means that my husband's osteopathic practice was a Bitcoin treasury company back in 2002 because he started taking Bitcoin payments and leaving them on his balance sheet. But the thing is if you've got spare cash, you should absolutely be putting some of that into Bitcoin. That is a very prudent thing to do. But there are two other main options. So the other one is that you dilute your shareholders. So you dilute your shareholders, raise capital. It's like a typical meme pump and dump scheme. Create some hype, pump the share price, sell it off, buy Bitcoin, rinse, repeat. Risky. And it's only really been this cycle that has happened. And then you got the Michael Saylor playbook, which is kind of debt and leverage. Once again, risky. probably arguably more risky than the share dilution. So when people use the term treasury company, they don't really specify what they're actually saying, which is almost like the issue that we have with Bitcoin and crypto, because people don't tend to understand the differences with that. And I can't remember why I went on a treasury company rant. Why
No,
remind
yeah, we
me?
were
Why
talking
did I
about
do
one
that?
one of the former
Oh, it
politicians that
started
now
its
has a
own
treasury
treasury
company.
company. That's right. Yeah, our previous
It's all
chancellor of
connected.
the chancellor of the Exchequer has started his own Bitcoin treasury company. He was only there for 38 days though, before him and Liz Truss crashed the economy. Um, so I think that there's a lot of conservative uh, MPs that understand it, but I think Labour, which is what Keir Starmer, our current Prime Minister, is, I think that the idea of Labour is inherently more socialist, and the idea of socialism is generally more centralised. And I may be giving them more credit than they deserve for kind of understanding the nuance here, but I feel like it would be completely against the socialist ethos of a Labour government to want a decentralized peer-to-peer
Hmm.
cash. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just
it's
don't
really
feel like it would align with their,
the values.
yeah,
It's very yeah, it's very interesting. So a few things that you said, I just wanted to comment on, which is really interesting. A lot of the times, because we're on spaces like all the time, especially Cade hosts most of the Wolf Bitcoin spaces, and it always comes up like, all right, let's try to define what a treasury company is. And what the consensus that we kind of came up with, like a lot of times, some of the spaces that I'm on is like a treasury company would be like that is the entire model is around Bitcoin per se, like a sailor with what MicroStrategy or strategy is doing. But then we would say, all right, for clarity, so we know what we're speaking about, we're going to say a company with Bitcoin reserves, which they do other things like, dental practice or whatever it is, but then they have reserves on the balance sheet. So it's kind of like, in theory, even though we haven't really seen this play out in the headlines, it has
exactly.
with with like a country with Bitcoin reserves. It's like, well, is this really a Bitcoin reserve? Or is this like someone just trying to jump on the headlines? Like, what's really going on here? There's a lot of muddy waters, so we don't know where it's going to go. The future is going to be very interesting, but hopefully clarity does come. Not clarity as in the Clarity Act. I'm talking about clarity as in we understand what people are speaking about, because it makes things just so much more easy when you're having communication, when you know what someone actually is speaking about. But the waters are very muddy, and I think that is very intentional. The muddier the waters are, the more confused people are. I think it gives for the opportunity for the system and the status quo and everything to keep going. And if nothing else, make the waters as muddy as possible. But you know, anyways, going on, I can go on all those things. I think those were just very interesting points that you brought up as far as like treasuries and where we're going and policy, not really truly understanding the values of a particular party or a leader and so forth. I mean, there's a lot that goes on behind this. So again, we just really appreciate all the efforts and everything that you're doing. But the last thing that I kind of wanted to ask about, since we kind of touched in that area, the general understanding and perception of Bitcoin reserves and a reserve currency in the UK. What's that like? Because we hear a lot about that in the US and starting to pop up around the world now. But is that something that is maybe not even in the politicians' conversations, but UK Bitcoiners, British Bitcoiners, are they? Is that something that they're looking forward to, like Bitcoin reserves in the UK, or is that really not a part of the conversation over there?
Do you think? Sorry, are you asking as part of
Uh,
a governmental strategy to hold Bitcoin? Is that what you mean?
just in general, yeah, it's like not just because we kind of got the understanding of where the government is on that, but what I mean is like the average Bitcoiner that is over there, are they looking towards Bitcoin reserves as a positive thing, or is like not even a thing? Like we're just looking at this peer to peer, we're the people, and we don't even care about reserves and companies and
No,
governments and all that.
It gets brought up, like people talk about it. Unfortunately, I think they talk about it as if it's a foregone conclusion that it's a good thing. At Bitcoin Policy, we just want the government to do a feasibility study on it, just to understand what it is. And the main reason that we want them to do that is obviously from a nation state's point of view, they need to understand why it would be useful if it could help with from an economic point of view. But I'd also like to explain to them why hash rate might be important in the future, because the UK has something crazy like 0.1% of the hash rate. America's got 40% of the hash rate, and I think that that's going to be something that needs to play out. But I can't even explain to them why Bitcoin's good, let alone going into hash rate and why they should care about that. But even if you come right back, the UK is the third largest sovereign holder of Bitcoin. We've got 61,250, which was seized from a Chinese Ponzi scheme. So what happened was that this Ponzi scheme had cash and they put it into Bitcoin, and then it got seized off Coinbase. That Bitcoin went up in value, and so the UK have just won a court case to say that they should keep that Bitcoin. They intend to make the victims whole, but there's now this surplus that's left over, which we could keep if we changed some legislation in this country, because under the Proceeds of Crime Act, we have to sell any assets if it's received as under a proceeds of crime. Like, that is legislation that we could change. So just like Germany sold all of its Bitcoin because it wasn't allowed to keep it, everyone's sitting there thinking, no, Germany, what are you doing? Don't be so silly. But it's because by law they had to. And unfortunately, when this court case wraps up, although we are the third largest sovereign holder of Bitcoin, we're probably going to be forced to sell it.
Huh. That is quite interesting. And I did not quite know that nuance, especially with how the German decision actually played out. Of course, when we're on spaces, and most of these people I'm speaking to are not in Germany. Therefore, we didn't quite understand all the nuances of Germany. So I really appreciate you sharing the context of that decision and what would happen in the UK if we start to see on the timeline that they unfortunately sold that, what that actually means, because there's going to be a lot of panic if that happens. I can tell you that right now, based on what the
Yeah, well,
timeline is.
we've been writing to them and saying, please be aware of this. We even did a paper, it's on our website, Bitcoin for Nation States, trying to explain to them why it's something that they should pay attention to. We've written open letters, trying to ask them to do a feasibility study into it, trying to explain why it is they need to understand this asset that they're holding, that it's completely different to any other asset, and that in actual fact, because it's worth, God, I think at one point it got worth, it was up to £6 billion, which I think was more than the total Metropolitan Police budget. It's like, and it was being held by the Met, which was insane. So just trying to get them to understand that it's not just any old asset, and that if they maybe understood it, then maybe they could change the Proceeds of Crime Act to make an exception for this one,
Yeah,
possibly. I don't know. We'll see.
yeah,
I don't think it will happen, but you got to try.
yeah. I got to try, right? Shoot your shot. You're gonna miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, like Wayne Gretzky always says. And yes, I am a Jamaican giving hockey references here. But what I will say though, no, I really appreciate this conversation. It has been really, really fun, and I appreciate all the amazing work that you're doing over there in the UK and traveling. Not just staying in one little corner of the world, but also traveling, seeing what's happening out there. And I do appreciate the conversation that we had and how you were able to just kind of just riff here with me. Obviously, we have no agendas, no script, just talking about Bitcoin, two Bitcoiners enjoying this. And we do appreciate everything that you're doing over there. Is there anything in specific that you would like us to take a look at and look forward to what you guys are doing over there, either you as an individual or the organization? I would love to hear a little bit about that before we get out of here. And again, just want to thank you for, just being able to share all this with us.
So nothing specific, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. We'll keep writing and responding and trying to educate as much as we possibly can. But one thing that I would, for people that are listening, that one message that I would really like people to understand is the thing that makes Bitcoin special is self custody. being able to hold your assets on your own. Anything else, I know that there are always trade-offs and you always have to consider what's right for you. But I think it's really, really important for people to understand that really not your keys, not your coins.
Absolutely. And earlier, you just shared how the UK came into possession of all that Bitcoin, and it was because it was not their keys. So it's all connected, and we do appreciate your time and that last message. So, those of you that are not familiar with Bitcoin Policy UK and the work that Susie Violet Ward is doing, I highly recommend that you check her out, check out the business or the organization itself. We'll have all of this information there in the comments. And of course, we'll be sharing this stuff out. And we'd just love for you to explore that, especially if you're in the UK and you're not truly understanding what's going on. There is resources out there for you. There is education. There are people that you can reach out to. And just like how we reached out to her, I'm sure you can do that too. If you have some interest, whether you want to volunteer or you just want to learn a little bit more, please cannot contact them. And we would really appreciate this because we're all Bitcoiners. We're in this thing together. And regardless of where we are in the world, the things that we have in common and the needs that we have as individuals are much more similar than different. So, with that said, we really appreciate it. And thank you for hanging out with us. We had a great little chat here. And those of you that are tuning in, this will be up. And of course, we are always excited to hear from you. So, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.